Hello. You are listening to Rot-Weiss-Rot REPORT, the podcast for those who live and work in Austria. Every week, we cover the most important events in a concise and accessible way, so you stay informed about the changes that affect your work, your documents, and your daily life. This week's episode covers deportation to Asia. Austria is discussing with EU partners the establishment of closed centers for irregular migrants in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. A victory in New York. Austrian diplomacy won a secret ballot and joined the UN Security Council for the first time in 20 years. The fight over passports. The number of new citizens in Vienna has risen by 56%, prompting the FPÖ to demand tighter naturalization rules. Millionaires on paper. The country has recorded a record number of wealthy individuals, though experts attribute this largely to rising property prices. New rules from 1st June. Minimum wages in retail have increased, assisted dying regulations have been simplified, and a smoking ban in gaming halls has come into effect. All this and more, coming right up.
We begin with a story that shocked many last week. The publication Politico reported that a group of European countries is discussing the creation of migrant deportation centers outside the European Union, and Austria is one of the key players in this initiative. What exactly is being proposed? According to journalists, Austria, the Netherlands, Denmark, Germany, and Greece may offer several countries outside the EU the option of hosting centers on their territory for people whose asylum applications have been rejected in Europe. Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan have been named among the possible partners. In return, these countries would be promised economic development assistance and easier visa regimes. How is it supposed to work? Imagine someone arrives in Austria, applies for asylum, asyle, and is refused. Currently, that person remains in the country until they are actually deported, a process that can take months. The new initiative would have such individuals transferred immediately to a center, say, in Kazakhstan, and from there sent back to their home country. European governments believe this would be faster and cheaper than the current system. This may sound radical and entirely new, but similar schemes have been attempted before, with little success. The United Kingdom wanted to send migrants to Rwanda, but the program was scrapped entirely when the government changed. Italy struck a deal with Albania on similar facilities, but lawyers identified serious legal flaws. This time round, controversy erupted even before the initiative had taken any concrete shape. Kazakhstan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs stated that no negotiations with the European Union on such centers are taking place. What does this mean for ordinary people? If you are living in Austria legally, with a residence permit, refugee status, or a stable residency document, nothing changes. Moreover, all information about these centers exists only in the press, and we have no confirmation from Austrian politicians that it is accurate. However, the story matters because it illustrates the general direction of EU migration policy, which is undeniably hardening. If you plan to remain in the country, make sure all your documents are in order, and stay alert to changes in the law.
Meanwhile, on June 4th at UN headquarters in New York, a secret ballot was held at the General Assembly, and Austria secured one of the non-permanent seats on the UN Security Council. This means Austria cannot veto Security Council resolutions on its own, but from 2027 to 2028, it will sit among the 15 most influential states in the world. Yes, skepticism about the effectiveness of the UN Security Council appears to be something of a trend these days. But this is nonetheless a major diplomatic victory for Austria. The country competed against Germany for the seat and won. Moreover, Austrian politicians spent no less than 15 years preparing this bid. The Foreign Ministry coordinated the process with representatives of various countries. Diplomatic meetings were held, negotiations conducted, bilateral relations cultivated, and now the result has arrived. Why does this matter? Firstly, for a country of fewer than 9 million people, this is a serious diplomatic achievement. Secondly, Austria has not sat on the Security Council for over 20 years. Thirdly, as a council member, Austria's representative will participate in decisions affecting the entire world, from the war in Europe to conflicts in the Middle East. For ordinary people, this will change nothing in daily life, but it shows that Austria remains an active presence on the international stage. This is the country where you live, and its voice in the world will now carry further.
At home, meanwhile, a genuine political storm has erupted over new statistics showing a sharp rise in the number of people obtaining Austrian citizenship. In Vienna, according to the city administration, the number of citizenship applications jumped by 56.9% year-on-year, a total of 14,445 applications. In Lower Austria, 1,475 people were naturalized between January and May of this year alone. Forecasts suggest this figure will exceed 3,000 by year's end. By comparison, 2,550 people were naturalized in that federal state in 2025. What lies behind these numbers? The largest wave consists of people who arrived in Austria roughly 10 years ago. In 2015, during the so-called refugee crisis, large numbers of migrants arrived from Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan. Under Austrian law, obtaining citizenship requires at least 10 years of legal residence, along with a range of other conditions: proof of German language proficiency, a stable income, and a clean criminal record. These people are now eligible for naturalization, and that is precisely what is happening. The political reaction was swift. The FPÖ, Freiheitliche Partei Österreichs, issued a sharp statement. Lower Austria Councillor Martin Antauer declared, "Our passport is not a cheap commodity." Asylum, asyle, is temporary protection, not an entry ticket to citizenship. FPÖ Secretary General Michael Schnedlitz called the situation a direct consequence of open borders policy. But the party did not stop at statements. Politicians are demanding that the minimum period of legal residence required for naturalization be extended from 10 to 15 or even 20 years, that former asylum seekers and those holding temporary protection status be entirely excluded from the right to citizenship, and that lifestyle checks on applicants, covering income, tax contributions, and social integration, be tightened. The other major party, the Österreichische Volkspartei, OVP, disagrees. OVP Secretary General Nico Marchetti reminded critics that the granting of citizenship is not a federal government matter, but a competence of the individual federal states. Each province controls the process itself, and if a person does not meet the requirements, they simply will not be naturalized. For many migrants, this is news that deserves very close attention. If you are planning to apply for citizenship and have already completed 10 years of legal residence, do not delay with your paperwork. The current rules remain in force for now, but the political debate could quickly translate into legislation. In a previous episode, we mentioned that political circles are already discussing raising the language requirement from B1 to B2 or even C1. That debate now has the additional dimension of extending the residency period. And these are no longer abstract ideas. They are concrete legislative initiatives from the governing forces in some federal states.
Here is another story that illustrates just how fraught the current state of Austrian politics is. On June 22nd, the Constitutional Court, Verfassungsgerichtshof, is scheduled to hold a public hearing on a matter of considerable importance. A law that allows Austrian intelligence services to read citizens' private messages in messaging applications such as WhatsApp and Signal. How did this come about? The law was pushed through by the ÖVP together with the SPÖ, Sozialdemokratische Partei Österreichs. The stated rationale was combating terrorism and organized crime. The security services argued that whereas telephone calls could previously be intercepted, modern criminals communicate in encrypted chats and are thus invisible to investigators. A new mechanism was therefore needed. This reasoning seemed logical, but not to everyone. Opposition came not only from civil liberties organizations but, notably, from political opponents. The FPÖ and Die Grünen joined forces to file a complaint with the Constitutional Court. In ordinary political debate, these two parties have little time for each other. The FPÖ are right-wing populists, the Greens are left-leaning environmentalists. But on the question of privacy and civil liberties, they suddenly found themselves in the same camp. Their argument is simple. If the state can read your WhatsApp messages, the concept of private life is effectively destroyed. All the more so because the law does not set clear criteria as to who may be monitored and who may not, creating a real risk of abuse. At the hearing on the 22nd of June, the judges are expected to determine how far the law complies with the Austrian Constitution and European human rights standards. Why does this concern you? Because this story reflects a serious debate now underway in Austria about the limits of permissible state oversight of citizens. And it concerns not only those who break the law, but everyone, migrants and native Austrians alike. We will report on the Constitutional Court's ruling when it comes, likely this summer.
It has also emerged that on June 2nd, the Parliamentary Committee on Social Affairs unanimously approved a highly significant change. The amendment, officially titled Sozialversicherungsnovelle, meaning an amendment to the social insurance law, was passed by both the governing coalition and the opposition, something that happens in the Austrian parliament only rarely. What has changed? Every person attending a medical assessment board, for instance, to process a disability claim, pension application, disability certificate, or any other expert evaluation, now has the official right to bring a trusted companion with them. In German, this is called a Vertrauensperson, a person you trust. This could be a family member, a friend, an interpreter, a social worker, anyone you trust and who can help you navigate the procedure. Why does this matter so much? Surveys showed that around 70% of citizens considered the medical assessment process disrespectful to patients. People complained of not being listened to, of not understanding the questions, of forgetting important things under stress and being unable to present their case coherently. Yet the outcome of the board's decision determines whether a person receives a disability pension, a disabled parking permit, or certain compensation entitlements. For migrants, this is particularly relevant. Imagine someone who arrived in Austria several years ago, worked, fell ill, and now needs to go through a medical assessment to apply for a pension. Their everyday German may be perfectly adequate, but medical terminology is another matter. They can now bring a friend or relative who has a stronger command of the language, or simply someone who can help them keep their bearings in a stressful situation. There is one further important detail. Under the new rule, public authorities are required to notify citizens in writing in advance that they have the right to attend the assessment with a companion. In other words, even if you were previously unaware of this option, the summons to the assessment must now state this clearly in black and white. The law officially enters into force on the 1st of September. So if you are summoned to a medical assessment after that date, you have the right not to attend alone, and no one can deny you that right. That concludes the week's main news. We now turn to business and economics.
Let us begin with a story that is both fascinating and, shall we say, somewhat ambiguous. At this very moment, $200,000 millionaires are living in Austria. Yes, you heard that correctly. 200,000 people, each holding assets worth more than $1 million. This is a historic record, and their number has roughly doubled over the past 10 years. Where do these figures come from? They are drawn from the annual UBS Global Wealth Report, produced by one of Switzerland's largest banks. Analysts examine the financial situation of millions of households around the world, and Austria features among the countries with the highest growth in wealthy individuals. But how is this possible in a country where everyone is complaining about high prices and a sluggish economy? Experts point to several factors. First, property. If you bought a flat in Vienna 10 or 15 years ago, it is now worth 2 to 3 times as much. Many people have effectively become millionaires on paper simply because they own an apartment. Second, rising share prices of Austrian companies. Third, inherited wealth. Austria has a stable economy where capital has accumulated across generations. Does this mean everyone in Austria is getting richer? Not at all. And this is where things get particularly interesting. The same statistics show that inequality in the country is growing. The wealthy are becoming wealthier, while ordinary people face ever-increasing pressure from inflation, rents, and energy costs. 200,000 millionaires is, unfortunately, not an indicator of general prosperity. It is more a sign that capital is concentrating in ever fewer hands. Why does this matter? Because news of this kind invariably returns the debate about reducing inequality to Parliament. The SPO and the Greens have been pushing for years for an inheritance tax, Erbschaftssteuer, and a wealth tax, the Vermögensteuer. The OVP remains opposed. But figures like these will only intensify the pressure. Meanwhile, Austrian economics published a comprehensive analysis last week on Vienna's social benefit system and reached a striking conclusion. The capital has developed a situation in which a significant proportion of migrants live in what is known as Teilzeit, part-time employment, working only a few hours per week, with the majority of their income coming from various social transfers, Mindestsicherung, Familienbeihilfe, and Wohnbeihilfe. Why is this a problem? Experts say that a person in this situation is effectively unable to escape poverty. Families receive benefits for years and cannot get back on their feet, while the transfers themselves place a growing burden on the city's budget, which is already in the red. What do experts recommend? The system needs to be reformed so that people are financially incentivized to work more. At present, many people deliberately avoid taking on a full-time contract because, in net terms, they would actually end up with less. This is not laziness, it is a rational decision. The proposed solution is to taper the loss of benefits as earnings rise. Earn more, and your benefits fall, but not abruptly or entirely. If you are receiving social benefits, do not hesitate to ask your local Magistratsabteilung for full details of your entitlements. Many people fail to claim everything they are owed because they fear that asking for more will result in losing what they already have. That is not always the case. Sometimes it is possible to receive more and work more at the same time, but you need to consult a specialist to find out.
Next, something that could cost drivers serious money. Austria is rolling out a new type of speed camera, one quite unlike anything seen before. These devices do not measure speed. They catch drivers holding a phone while at the wheel. How does it work? The camera is equipped with artificial intelligence. It photographs the vehicle from above, capturing the driver through the windscreen. If a phone is visible in their hand, the system automatically identifies this and sends the information to the police. The standard procedure then follows. The vehicle's owner receives a letter with a fine. Using a phone while driving carries a penalty of up to 140 euros. If the situation results in an accident, the fine increases significantly and may be accompanied by administrative or criminal liability. These cameras are not a trivial matter. A single call on the move could cost as much as 6 months' car insurance. The first devices are appearing in Tyrol and Lower Austria, with plans for a gradual rollout across the entire country, particularly on motorways, where violations are especially dangerous. They will likely appear on all major highways, so we remind you, if you are driving and need to make a call, use a headset or hands-free system. Holding a phone is prohibited even at a red light. Yes, it is tempting to reply to that message, but one fine will make that time-saving an extremely expensive choice. And finally, a story that dominated every Austrian outlet last week. A pizzeria in the north of the country introduced a new policy. An extra empty plate costs 11 euros. In other words, if you come to the restaurant with a friend, order one pizza and ask for an extra plate to share it, you will be charged for that plate. The owner's explanation: too many groups order a single dish between them, yet he still has to pay staff to serve the table. So now it works like this. If 4 people come in and order only one pizza, 3 of them will find extra plates on their bill at 11 euros each. This naturally triggered a storm of debate on social media and in the Austrian press. Some supported the owner. A restaurant is a business, not a charity. Others were outraged, calling it a form of deception. The owner eventually gave interviews to several publications to explain his position in detail. In the spaces he rents, the price per square meter has tripled in 2 years. Energy is more expensive, so are staff wages. If 4 people occupy a table and spend a combined total of, say, 20 euros, the restaurant is effectively running at a loss. The choice is therefore either to introduce a minimum spend per table or to charge for the free plate. He chose the latter. Why does this story matter? Because it illustrates just how precarious the situation is in Austrian hospitality right now. Many family-run restaurants are closing because they simply cannot keep up with their running costs, while customers, accustomed to affordable lunches, are increasingly vocal about rising prices. Even a practice as unusual as charging for an empty plate is not an eccentricity. It is a survival strategy. If you are going out to eat in a group, read the menu carefully, especially the small print at the bottom. Different establishments may have different rules: a minimum spend per person, a service charge, or a surcharge for terrace seating. These should all be clearly stated. And one more thing, none of this applies to tips. Trinkgeld in Austria remains entirely voluntary.
And now, the most important part of this episode. Here we have gathered information that relates directly to your life in Austria. New rules, reminders about important changes, and practical advice. We begin with changes that came into effect on June 1st. We touched on some of them in previous episodes, but they are now in force. First, the smoking ban. From 1st June, smoking is prohibited in areas with public gaming machines, so-called Spielhallen and Wettbüros, betting shops. This is part of a broader anti-smoking campaign in public spaces. Ordinary restaurants and bars in Austria banned smoking long ago. Now it is the gaming industry's turn. Second, medical benefits. From 1st June, several new arrangements apply to medical payments. In particular, the state pension fund, Pensionsversicherungsanstalt, has expanded its list of medicines covered by compulsory insurance, and tariffs for some types of examination have been updated. This is genuinely good news, particularly for people with chronic conditions. Some medications that previously had to be paid for in full are now partially or fully reimbursed. Third, digital services. From 1st June, more government services have moved online. Through the Digitales Amt application, you can now process more documents without leaving home, particularly convenient for people who work or have young children. No need to take time off, queue, or collect numbered tickets. Everything works from a smartphone. Fourth, wages. From 1st June, new collective agreements, Kollektivvertrag, came into effect in several sectors. Minimum rates in retail have been increased. If you work in a supermarket, a clothing shop, or any retail business, check your most recent payslip. The increase should have been applied automatically, but it is worth verifying. The next topic is a sensitive one. From 1st June, updated regulations under the Sterbeverfügungsgesetz, the assisted dying law, have entered into force. To put it simply, since 2022, Austria has provided a mechanism for so-called voluntary ending of life for people with terminal illnesses. The procedure has now been slightly simplified from an administrative standpoint. The substance of the law itself has not changed, but compliance has been made easier. We sincerely hope this information will not be needed by you or your loved ones. One more topic, both contentious and sensitive. The Austrian government is preparing a law that would ban girls from wearing the hijab in state schools up to a certain age. 2 lawsuits against this proposed law have already been filed with the Constitutional Court, one by a civic organization, the other by parents of school children. What exactly is being planned? The ban would apply to girls under the age of 14, who would not be permitted to attend school with their heads covered. The reasoning of the law's supporters is that until a girl reaches the age of maturity, she has the right to make her own decision about wearing a hijab, and until that point, she is often under family pressure. School should therefore be a place where all children are equal. The opposing argument is that decisions about religious symbols are a private family matter. A ban constitutes a restriction on freedom of religion guaranteed by the Austrian Constitution and European norms. Moreover, a similar law already existed in Austria from 2019, but was struck down by the Constitutional Court precisely on the grounds that it violated freedom of religion. The current situation is this: the law has not yet even entered into force and is already being challenged in court. If this is a matter that directly concerns you, be aware that pending the court's ruling, no prohibitions are actually in effect. All rules within schools remain at the discretion of their administration. Should a conflict arise at your child's school concerning dress, you have the right to approach the Schulpartnerschaft, the school board, or the Schulqualitätsmanagement, the Education Quality Authority. Because whether or not it suits everyone, in a constitutional state, no decision may violate the law in force. In a moment, we will continue with news from Vienna.
Before turning to more familiar stories from the capital, let us share some interesting figures. Ahead of World Food Safety Day, observed on the 7th of June, the Vienna Authority Marktamt, the Market Inspection Service, published its annual statistics. And the results are rather encouraging. Only 0.5% of food samples taken for testing in Vienna were found to be hazardous to health. How does the system work? The city has 92 food quality inspectors operating around the clock, conducting approximately 32,000 inspections a year. They check everything, from the small bakery on the corner to large supermarkets, from school and hospital kitchens to catering establishments and food production facilities. In total, around 18,500 outlets selling or preparing food operate in Vienna. What do inspectors find? Some cases are quite striking. For example, a dangerous substance, Bacillus cereus toxin, was recently detected in baby food. Thanks to the work of the Marktamt, the information was transmitted through a rapid alert system across Europe. Earlier, the authority also triggered the withdrawal of 28 million bottles of lemonade across Austria after metal fragments were found to have possibly entered the product. According to the WHO, foodborne illnesses affect roughly 10% of the world's population each year and cause close to 500,000 deaths. Against that backdrop, Vienna's figures are genuinely impressive. The system clearly works. If you buy food in an ordinary supermarket, the likelihood of purchasing something harmful is very low. That said, basic hygiene rules remain as important as ever. Wash your fruit, check expiry dates, and so on. Next, a topic currently being discussed by every parent in Vienna. In the popular Donau Park, 2 attempted child abductions have been recorded, occurring 2 months apart, and the suspect is still at large. The first incident occurred on April 2nd in broad daylight. A 5-year-old girl was playing hide-and-seek with her nursery group when a stranger approached her and ordered her to come with him. The girl refused and ran immediately to her carers. Police searched the park but found no one. On 29th May, the scene was repeated near the so-called Pope's Meadow. This time, a man approached a 9-year-old girl, grabbed her by the neck, and tried to restrain her. The child was rescued by a passerby who happened to be nearby. The attacker panicked and fled into the bushes. The girl was able to describe him: an elderly, very thin and very tall man, close to 2 meters in height. Vienna's criminal police are now searching for him. Uniformed patrols and plainclothes officers have been deployed in the park, and local schools and nurseries have been alerted. There is no need to panic. Incidents of this kind are rare in Vienna. But if you are walking in the park with children, simply keep them in sight and remind them once more never to go anywhere with an unknown adult. If you notice suspicious individuals paying inappropriate attention to children, call 133 immediately. And finally, a story with all the hallmarks of a crime thriller. A gang of serial thieves has been operating in and around Vienna, targeting a very specific category of property: private wine collections and wine cellars. What has already been stolen? According to preliminary police data, approximately 20 thefts have been recorded in and around the capital over the past few months, with total losses exceeding €200,000. The thieves are not after ordinary supermarket bottles. They target collectible vintages, aged Burgundies, Austrian Prädikatswein, expensive Bordeaux. Investigators believe the gang has inside knowledge of where valuable collections are held, possibly through sommelier services, insurance companies, or individuals with access to information about private collectors. The thieves typically strike at night, appear to know security codes, enter premises, remove specific bottles, and vanish. Where does the wine end up? Most likely on the black market. Europe has an entire shadow trade in collectible wine, with bottles changing hands through private auctions. The most sought after are old vintages from the 1960s and 1970s. A single bottle can be worth tens of thousands of euros. Police are advising owners of private wine collections to check their security systems, refrain from posting photographs of their collections on social media, and avoid sharing information about their bottles widely. If you happen to notice suspicious activity near a Weinkellerei, for instance, lorries moving at night, please report it to the police. That was all the main news from the capital. In a moment, we will cover what happened last week in the federal states.
We begin with Lower Austria. On June 6th, a meeting took place in Hanover between the state leadership and representatives of the German federal state of Lower Saxony. The topic? Sharing experience in the field of renewable energy. Why is this worth discussing? Because both states have set themselves a highly ambitious goal: to become leaders in the Energiewende, the transition to clean energy. And both have already achieved significant results. Lower Saxony generates, in annual terms, 100% of its electricity consumption from renewable sources. Lower Austria does the same, though with a different mix. The German state relies primarily on powerful offshore wind installations, while the Austrian state combines hydroelectric plants, onshore wind turbines, and solar panels. Both sides now wish to develop an energy storage strategy, the greatest challenge facing green energy. The sun does not shine around the clock. The wind does not blow constantly. Large battery systems, pumped storage hydro plants, and hydrogen storage technologies are all needed. Austria has experience in this area thanks to its mountainous geography, specifically with pumped storage hydro plants. Germany brings industrial-scale solutions. Lower Austria Deputy Governor Stefan Pernkopf noted that this is not only about ecology, but also about ordinary electricity bills. The more a country produces its own energy, the less it depends on fluctuations in global market prices. Over the past 4 years, we have all seen what happens when a country relies on imported gas. The war in Ukraine, conflicts in the Middle East, problems with tankers in the Red Sea, and energy prices double or triple overnight. Austria is therefore taking a serious step towards independence. In Tyrol, a legal battle has erupted over an ordinary fence. A local farmer invented a special electric shock enclosure. Here is how it works. A wolf approaches the sheep, receives a shock, and never returns. The inventor says the system has already protected dozens of alpine farms. The wolves are unharmed. The sheep are safe. Seemingly an ideal solution. The problem is that animal welfare organizations have come out against the invention. They argue that the electric shocks could injure not only wolves but other wild animals, foxes, deer, chamois, even birds. Ecologists also contend that such enclosures disrupt natural migration routes. The result is a full-blown legal battle with claims and counterclaims. Because in recent years, wolves have indeed returned to the Alps, reclaiming their natural habitats after nearly disappearing in the previous century. For conservationists, this is welcome news. For farmers, it is a disaster. Last year alone, wolves killed several hundred sheep in Austria, direct losses for people who have spent years tending their flocks. The government is trying to strike a balance. Some states have already permitted the culling of animals that have repeatedly attacked livestock, but this has proved insufficient. Most farmers are demanding other solutions, in particular, subsidies for protective fencing. The story of one fence is therefore really the story of a profound conflict between economics, ecology, and the traditional way of life in the Alps.
In Vorarlberg, there is a critical shortage of doctors. According to a new study by WIFO, the Austrian Institute of Economic Research, there are only 180 doctors per 100,000 residents. By comparison, Vienna has 343, and the Austrian average is 246. The situation is particularly acute for GPs. Only 53 per 100,000 residents, against a national average of 81. And the number of medical professionals has fallen by nearly 16% over the past 4 years. This means that finding a family doctor in Vorarlberg is becoming increasingly difficult. While no radical solution has yet been proposed, WIFO experts recommend at least expanding the network of Primärversorgungseinheiten, primary care centers where doctors of various specializations work together. And finally, some useful news for those who live near Gmunden or are looking for work in Upper Austria. On 5th June, Hofer, Austria's largest discounter, announced a major investment in logistics. The sum involved is 100 million euros and above. In the town of Pinsdorf, a brand new logistics center dedicated to fruit and vegetables will be built by 2028. And in 2029, the existing center in Trumau, in Lower Austria, will be expanded. Large logistics centers mean, above all, hundreds of jobs. Drivers, warehouse staff, refrigeration equipment operators, dispatchers, quality control workers, and more. These are not highly paid positions, but they offer stable employment with a full social insurance package and a collective agreement. If you live in the Gmunden region or near Trumau and are looking for work, keep an eye on job postings. Construction is due to begin next year, when workers will also be needed on the building sites themselves. From 2028 and 2029 onwards, the centers themselves will begin recruiting staff.
And that is all for this week. As always, let us close with a brief recap of the most important points, the things worth remembering. From 1st September, the new Vertrauensperson rule comes into effect. If you are called to a medical assessment board after that date, you have the right to bring a trusted companion, a friend, a relative, or an interpreter. Remember that word, Vertrauensperson. The relevant authority is now also required to inform you of this right in advance in the summons itself. A further reminder about the changes that came into force on the 1st of June. Smoking is banned in Spielhallen and Wettbüros. Medical benefits have been extended. The Digitales Amt app has acquired new functions, and minimum wages in retail have risen. Do check your most recent payslip. The increase should have been applied automatically, but it is better to be sure. For anyone planning to apply for Austrian citizenship, a small but important piece of advice: do not delay. The current rules requiring 10 years of legal residence and a B1 level of German are still in force, but discussions about tightening them are growing more concrete by the day. In some federal states, the procedure has already become more demanding in practice. If you meet all the requirements today, start the process today, not next year. And one final, very practical point: no phone in your hand at the wheel. Austria now has new AI-powered cameras that automatically detect whether a driver is holding a phone. The fine is up to €140 for a single call. That brings today's episode to a close. Thank you for being with us this week. We will continue to keep you informed about the most important events. Subscribe to the weekly podcast Rot-Weiss-Rot Report, the podcast for those who live and work in Austria. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Spotify. Until next week.